So hello, everyone, and welcome to our brown bag session on logging. My name is Lisa, and I'm one of the CSMs here at Sumo Logic, and I'm going to get things kicked off here for us. So, well, first off, I just want to thank everyone for adjusting to the reschedule. I know we normally have these on the second, third, and fourth Tuesday of the month. So I appreciate everyone for making the time to adjust to this specific week's change. But if you haven't been to one of our sessions before, they are normally on Tuesdays, second, third, and fourth. Each Tuesday is a different theme, and we usually have a technical person to spend time with you all to go over technical topics, and it's in a more intimate setting, very informal. So I have allowed in the chat that everyone can use the chat, and you can also use the Q&A as well. If you have any questions, you don't have to wait till the end. Go ahead and just ask them. I can take you off mute if you raise your hand. And so today we'll be hearing from Manas. He's one of our principal product managers, and he's going to be covering data tier partitions, searching across tiers, and a whole bunch of good stuff he has teed up for us today. So like I said, any questions, feel free to please ask them, and we will take care of you. And the session is also being recorded as well, which we'll have posted at probably towards the end of the week. So without further ado, I will kick it over to Manas.
Thanks, Lisa. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Manas here. As Lisa introduced, I'm a principal product manager at Sumo Logic. I've been with Sumo Logic for close to 3 years, focusing primarily on the log search, both the platform and the experiences part. And today's focus from the brown bag session is going to be around data tiers. I do not know, and it would help me just if you guys type it out in the messages, whether you are a data tiers customer or not. It just helped me understand the level of understanding that you have with data tiers, as well as, know that people are in it and participating. So would help me. I will start the slideshow and just give me a minute. I think I'm having some challenges sharing.
Okay, we got a couple of comments so far, Manas. Looks like a couple of people just starting off with Sumo in their onboarding process, starting to deploy, but still ramping up. Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Stephanie.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just facing some hiccups in terms of displaying this out. So just bear with me.
Okay.
Just one quick minute and I should have it going. And okay, I am going to hit the slide share. Lisa, can you please confirm you're able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So this is more or less the set of the slides that I wanted to walk through today. And just by means of agenda, what we'll be covering is one, a very quick introduction into what are data tiers, what is Sumo's view in terms of data tiers. We've had data tiers as a product capability for over 3+ years. We introduced the original Infrequentier way back in 2018, 2019. And then since then, we've augmented it with Infrequentier. So I'll do a quick recap in terms of what are tiers, and then I'll jump straight into data organization, specifically from the logs perspective, logs organization and how data tiers plays a role there. I'll then subsequently cover some of the best practices with logs organization, and then move on to querying of logs which are in data tiers, and again cover best practices, and then we can move into credit visibility with data tiers, right? So at each one of the sections, I'll cover some of the content and then potentially take a pause, look at some of the questions that you have. So in case there are some questions that you guys build up as I walk through the slides, feel free to share it out in the chat, and I'll cover it once I get to some sort of a logical point within the context of the presentation. Okay. Introduction of tiers, right? So what are data tiers? Basically, data tiers are an integral part of Sumo Logic's differentiated licensing model. Sumo Logic's differentiated licensing model is built upon credits, which can be used across multiple product areas. And data tiers is a key piece of it from the perspective of how you are able to bring in logs, manage them. And they are specifically designed to give the maximum choice, value, and flexibility to our end customers. We've heard over and over from our customers in terms of not all logs have the same end value. Not all logs are treated equally, and hence this is one of our efforts in terms of trying and providing a product functionality which drives value, and based on the value that customers get, there is that differentiated pricing that we can offer from the perspective of 3 tiers, right? And bear in mind, as we do all of this, they're still aligned to all of the analytics and intelligence value that we try to drive through the product. So that's like the fundamental basis. And hence, again, just by structure, what constitutes data tiers, it is 3 tiers that we have. One is the continuous data. The continuous data is primarily for mission critical analytics. Look at this as what all the data that potentially as customers you would look at storing it for lower retention, lower duration within any sort of logging platform and on Sumo, and how you're trying to drive the maximum benefit from it in terms of the same data is being referenced both to drive dashboards, alerting, used in troubleshooting scenarios, and potentially has a shorter shelf life, right? In subsequent slides, I'll go into what sort of logs might be best suited for it. But that is number one is continuous tier. From a pricing perspective, continuous tier is priced at a fixed dollar per ingest GB, and all of the features are available to be consumed in the context of data that is there in continuous tier, right? All of the latest capabilities from monitors, SLOs, reliability management through SLOs, alerting, dashboards, all of that is available on continuous tier, right? The next tier that we offered, and this primarily originated as a result of, again, customers saying, hey, not all data is of the same value. Help me differentiate in terms of the different logs, and help me also optimize on my costs, as well as help me optimize my utilization of the product. And that's where frequent tier comes in. Frequent tier is also a fixed price per ingest GB tier. However, the way it's been designed, there are limited capabilities available on frequent tier. From the name, it is intended for frequent usage, as in when customers feel there is that data set that is potentially medium duration retention. I would categorize anything from 60 to 365 days as medium duration retention, and it is not voluminous logs, which you feel the value is primarily from the perspective of going back, troubleshooting, investigating sort of workflows. Those are well suited for the frequent tier. Again, it's a high to medium usage ad hoc analysis tier, right? And lastly, we have the infrequent tier. The infrequent tier is differentiated from continuous and frequent in terms of the pricing. It is a pay per use sort of a tier, where you pay a fixed price, which is significantly lower per dollar of GB ingest. And there is an additional price that is paid every time you look to scan the data. And hence, initially, as we positioned the Infrequentier, it was positioned for low usage ad hoc analysis for all of the data sets that are potentially more suited from an audit compliance perspective. However, there are certain use cases that you would look to drive one-off during the course of a year, or maybe twice or thrice, but basically not as high as the Frequentier, right? Capabilities wise, the Infrequentier supports all of the capabilities that are supported on the Frequentier. So between the frequent and the infrequent, the choice to the customers is primarily in terms of what sort of a pricing model they would prefer, whether they would prefer a fixed price or they would prefer to pay as they go, right? And then while all of this pricing mechanism has been put out, one aspect to highlight is, again, from a value perspective, trying to drive maximum value, it is that the pricing is primarily on either the ingest or the storage or the scan components, and there is no user-specific or a seat-specific pricing that has been put out there, and consequently, it's for unlimited users to be used. The only additional note to be called out is data tiers has been made available to all of our customers who primarily have some sort of an enterprise package. And this is primarily for the reason that a majority of the customers who have an enterprise package have come back to us. They usually have huge volumes of data. They also have huge scans that they end up running in. And consequently, they run into a lot more of these challenges of, hey, how do I differentiate between my data versus some of the other packages? And then consequently, that's kind of the rationale in terms of offering this primarily to the enterprise class of customers. Before I jump deep into logs organization, just take a quick look at the chat window.
Yeah, Manas, Cameron asked if we have any plans of making a sort of a middle ground tier where frequent would have dashboards or it would have monitors.
That's something we are not evaluating in terms of providing frequent with any sort of additional capability. There are some early thoughts in terms of how we would like to, further simplify all of these tiers, but nothing concrete right now to share.
Thank you. That looks like the only question so far, unless anyone has another one. I could take you off of mute. No, okay, go ahead, Manas.
Cool. And again, right, just internalizing this, while this was good from a marketing perspective in terms of calling out what data tiers maps into, just for all of you practitioners out there trying to internalize this in terms of how do I look at data tiers as I look to plan out my all of my logs data for my org. You need to first and foremost, ask yourself the question, how frequently do you look at accessing that particular data set? If the answer is more regularly or continuously, your continuous tier is going to be your preferred choice of tier. And here, again, we continue to dog food our own product. And the way internally we've been leveraging this is from the perspective of sending all of our application logs, primarily from the production systems, as well as some of our system logs, over into the continuous tier. Why? Because we want to continually monitor the service. We want to be alerted in case of any sort of scenarios, outages, much before a lot of our customers run into it. And consequently, that is all of our high value, potentially low retention sort of data set that we send over to the continuous tier. If for some of the data sets or some of the logs, answer comes up as, yeah, we are looking to access the data often, but not necessarily regularly. That's when you would frequent tier would be the best bet in terms of the tier. And there again, right, some of the examples that internally we've been looking at is some of the development logs that go in as our engineering team is working on various functionalities. Subsequently, when we get into staging environments, when we are in the testing environments, all of those logs in terms of us being able to troubleshoot, understand, are all available on the frequent tier. Again, from the perspective of the broader team, these are all logs that are available on Sumo to be queried immediately. They do not necessarily need to be dashboarded out or monitored over a long period in time, because that is what we would expect to do from a production logs perspective. And hence, the frequent tier fits the bill, as well as helps the team achieve their goals. And lastly, if the answer to how frequently do we access the data turns back as, really scarcely or intermittently, then infrequent tier is the choice. Now, some of our verbose logs data is often stored in the infrequent tier. These are some of our logs that we do not necessarily look at unless there is any sort of an audit compliance. I think one logs category that is missing here is the config logs, along with the debug logs and CDN logs. The value that at least internally we drive out of them is low. However, we do need them on and on and off sort of a scenario, extremely intermittently or infrequently, and hence having them in the infrequent tier makes our life easy in terms of not having to reindex or do anything else with the logs, but still know that we've ingested it, we are paying extremely low in terms of 10 cents per GB, and but we only pay for it when we really scan, and because the scans are not going to be too high, we are going to benefit in terms of having all of this data readily available, right? So again, just summarizing it, it's continually use data, more regularly use data that I need to, that I run my operations on top of. It has to be critically as part of the continuous tier. Data that is good to have, it is useful at some point in time, but is not necessarily driving operations, has a home in the frequent tier. And lastly, data that is primarily from an audit, compliance, as well as overall compliance perspective, infrequent tier is the home for those sort of data. Right. Now I'm jumping directly into logs organization with tiers. And this is a quick recap in terms of the capabilities that the product supports, and then I'll jump into the best practices, right? In terms of log organization with tiers, for some of you who might only be using continuous tiers, or for others who are using multiple tiers, the process remains the same. It remains a two-step setup process. Collect your data using any one of the collectors hosted, installed, or the hotel collector, which has been more recently made available. And once that is available, basically route all of your data to the appropriate data tier. Again, for some of you not leveraging either the frequent or infrequent tier, this might not be a consideration, but these are all capabilities that are available there, right? And as we move further in terms of the best practice, I want to take a sample application here, considered an online food ordering application, and just run through it in again, just to make sure we understand which tier suits for which needs, right? And from that perspective, let's assume this particular application has three primary services: the order, billing, and the delivery or the tracking sort of a service. And in the context of a billing service, which has both business critical as well as a lot of verbose data, how do we kind of have all of the data within Sumo, yet utilize Sumo's data tiers from the perspective of driving efficiency, right? And there, all of these application logs or the service logs that are production, that are business critical, that are operations critical, are all put into the continuous tier. Any of the other logs that are coming in, again, as a result of the staging, QE environment, in some cases, there are some debug logs that are really queried heavily. They sit within the frequent tier. And lastly, any of the app debug logs, infra logs, or any sort of billing device configuration sort of logs would all go sit within the infrequent tier. Now, as I've kind of put it out, there are references in terms of the routing expression and how you would capture this for each one of this for each one of these data sources coming in, or the log sources coming in. And the call out here is that as these log sources are being collected, if there is an opportunity, we should tag using our metadata tags the specific tier that we think this particular data is intended to, be it either continuous, frequent, or infrequent. And as we get into the best practices, I can take a couple of scenarios where then you can see the benefit of how data organization and setting this up much earlier in the logs ingestion pipeline would benefit, right? But for now, this is one of those suggestions, which is as we bring in data, please ensure that you tag all of these log sources with the tier that you believe this data might be intended to, right? And from a best practices perspective, there are three real steps, right? Like as I said, from the first stage, it's primarily around collecting data and tagging data. What I was highlighting, and where this gets beneficial is, let's assume there is a particular data source that was in the staging environment, and for some reason this service was being newly developed, and there was a longer engineering investment in terms of developing this service. It was a re-architecture of an existing service, and consequently, while it was being run in shadow, it was critical from an operations perspective. So initially, you can start off tagging this particular service as well as the previous service, both to be flowing into the continuous tier, right? And over a period in time, as you realize that, okay, we've done all the work in terms of validating the new service and its architecture, and we are good to go, and you would like to ramp down your existing service, at that point in time, just for that particular source category and that source host, all you would have to then go back and do is just flip the tier over to frequent or infrequent, assuming you're going to have some logs running for some duration, and you would like to just keep it from the perspective of wanting to troubleshoot, etc., or in certain cases where folks want to look back in terms of how the previous version of the service was behaving, etc. That becomes a very effective and a clean mechanism for you to control, so that you can then drive data right from the source in terms of funneling it either to a partition in the continuous tier or a partition into the infrequent tier. The second best practice suggestion is to ensure all of these fields are parsed up front, right? Again, the parsing of the fields is critical from the perspective of helping identify the value of the data, whether both from a search perspective as well as primarily from a search perspective in terms of how the data is intended to be used. And consequently, the fields would be useful to capture it in advance. As an example, if some of the debug data is intended to flow into the frequent tier, or example, maybe what I've shown here is primarily from the perspective of routing debug data into frequent tier. But if there are some scenarios where you want to route info logs into the infrequent tier, it would be useful to set up an FER like that and ensure, again, all of these logs have an enriched field tagged on, which again call out to the tier that they would like the data to flow into. And lastly, from the perspective of when you're trying to set these partitions up, as well as creating these routing expressions that map into the partition, there is we can leverage both the fields as well as any sort of metadata that is coming in to help effectively drive the data into the relevant partition. So as an example, as we've been following through, all of the billing application logs that is critical is being tagged over into the continuous tier, and some of the billing infra logs is being tagged over to the infrequent tier. And same from an FER perspective, that there is a further filtering in the context of the billing app log, so that you ensure that it's only log level debug that goes to frequent versus rest everything else goes to continuous, right? You could additionally drive it in terms of info, etc., but just from the example out here. And so finally, when we get down to the partition configuration, as you can see, it's basically a collection of everything coming in from the billing sources, which then has tier equal to continuous, and all of that is routed into the continuous tier, versus all of the rest of the data that is tagged effectively as infrequent is routed into the infrequent tier. So again, right, highlighting this primarily from the perspective of during the course of a service or over the course of a year or so, as you feel there are certain data sources that might need to be re-tiered, setting up all of your tiers initially in this sort of a fashion will help you with re-tiering as and when needed with minimal customer success or Sumo intervention.
Manas, we have a question. If the tier is not defined in meta, is it implicitly continuous?
Yes, that's the default behavior. And actually, just to add on to that answer, over here in this sample scenario that we considered, if customers do not tag any of their data to be going into continuous or infrequent from the how the routing expression is configured, the rest of the data flows in automatically into what is called as the Sumo logic underscore default, which sits on the continuous tier. And hence, consequently, you will find all of your data homed in the partition named Sumo logic underscore default, which is the default out of the box partition, and it will all be in the continuous tier. So again, if there are folks out there who are looking at optimizing this from a cost perspective and ensuring they identify the right logs to the right tier, the volume of data that they would end up defaulting into the Sumo logic default partition will be extremely low, and it might be really data that you're fine with being in the continuous tier. Okay, I will move on to the next slide. And yeah, so again, right, this was primarily the 3 steps or the best practices from the perspective of logs organization that we wanted to call out. Moving on to querying logs across the 3 tiers. All of you are familiar with the log search page on the right and all the capabilities it provides. Again, a quick recap in terms of how log querying is provided. So users have to explicitly mention the name of either the index using _view or _index. They could use any of the keywords along with the metadata alongside the index name. It helps with the additional filtering, as well as if some of our customers are already organized based on metadata and they find it more comfortable, that still is a queryable field. And lastly, if there are multiple partitions that users are familiar with, they would have to explicitly mention them using _index equal to A or _index equal to B. And just a couple of points that I would like to call out here from the perspective of querying. Potentially, some of you have gone through our certification or gone through some of our videos, but similar to all of the other databases, from a querying perspective, as long as there is a well-defined scope of data identified in the query, it obviously aids in any sort of performance. However, the best part about Sumo is you don't really need to define a scope. But the flip side of that with tier sometimes becomes that then all of the scope, as in all of the data, could be by default considered based on how you write a query or not. So that's both the power of the platform as well as something that users need to watch out. And so as I talk into some of these best practices, it will try to I'll try to clarify that in terms of what could be an impact from a credit perspective or what is of impact from a performance perspective, right? So moving ahead in terms of best practices of querying logs, right? Some of our new users to Sumo who might find it difficult to go through the training or would be a shortage of time in terms of going over the videos to understand the query language, they can always jump into what is the basic mode. This is again available on the log search tab itself through the ellipsis icon. If you click on it, there is a basic mode. You can go there for extremely simple queries, right? This is primarily for new users to Sumo who would prefer a click, select, and search sort of a workflow, for whom this would be useful. Of course, all of those concerns would remain, wherein any new user could potentially burn through some extra credits on Infrequentier if you have set up some partitions, and hence it's always best practice to ensure users actually are aware of this particular call out in terms of the volume of data that is being scanned. Take note of it and then go hit the search button. In terms of advanced users, again, advanced users being users who are familiar with the Sumo query language, as well as they are aware of data organization to a large extent, they can use index names in the context of the query, right? And this is a very simplistic query that I've written, but I'm sure there must be an elaborate additional few operators or additional parsing that might be required. But the call out here is that as long as we can identify a more narrow scope of data set to start with, all of the additional operations around it, be it either parsing, be it either aggregation, etc., both from a performance perspective is optimized, as well as it helps in minimizing any sort of credit burn or consumption, because again, right, in the Infrequentier, the credit consumption is based on per GB scan. And in case you define a more broader scope of data set to search within, it just unnecessarily bloats up the credit consumption. So from that perspective, advanced users, again, who are aware of data organization, can leverage the index names to query. The third best practice is, again, from the perspective for advanced users, but this time they're not really aware of the data organization. There are potentially organizations where data organization is kind of managed by one set of teams, specifically either the SRE or the performance team, while there are additional other developer teams who look at performing queries. And in that case, if there is lesser chance for enablement of some of these data organization constructs, they can definitely fall back to the usage of underscore data tier operator. That underscore data tier operator will help them get going in terms of achieving their end goals of looking at data, querying on it, ensuring that the data is considered as part of the query. The challenge here then becomes from a credit consumption perspective, that then some of these queries would end up scanning a larger volume of data and not necessarily optimizing the credit usage, right? And lastly, as I was making that call out, users to always review the estimated volume of logs scanned before running the search. And subsequently, once the search completes, there is a more detailed breakdown if the search has scanned multiple tiers, right? And as you can see here, by clicking on this session, once the search is completed, you get this pop-up in terms of, in the context of a specific search, where you can make sense of, hey, how much data was scanned on the infrequent tier and how much data was scanned on the continuous tier. Again, this would primarily be from the perspective of that curious user. And we do not think a lot of our regular users who are focused from searching perspective would benefit. But this information is there if some of the users would like to make use of it. I'll pause before jumping into the next topic around visibility. Any questions that you see, Lisa?
I don't see any in the chat at the moment. But again, feel free to come off of or raise your hand and I'll take you off of mute if you like to talk versus the chat.
Okay. Then I'll continue ahead in terms of calling out credit consumption visibility, right? Again, with all of the data tiers, best practices around logs organization as well as logs querying, we can then come to how do administrators, Sumo administrators, get visibility in terms of what is the org's overall credit consumption across data tiers, right? And as you might have noticed, this is our account overview page. And in the context of the account overview page, there is additional drill down available and aggregation available both by day, week, month, as well as a downloadable report which provides insight in terms of how much actual credits was consumed in terms of ingesting data into the infrequent tier, how much actual data or rather how much actual credits was consumed in ingesting data in the frequent tier and the continuous tier, and really how much did all my users scan the infrequent tier over the course of the month, day, week, and so on, right? And again, this helps users get a detailed view in terms of their overall credit consumption across the months or across the period of interest. And then they can look at either forecasting in terms of what their actual credit burns could be based on how the team is utilizing the platform, or look at putting in process some steps that would ensure the credits last the duration, either by controlling the ingest or whatever means are desirable. But this is that single page where you can get a more detailed insight in terms of the credit consumption. Having said this, this is more from an org-wide level, and as you might have seen, there are references to both the metrics ingest as well as additional other storages. There is also another app called the Infrequentier app. This app is available out of the box. It's on our app store, and all you need to do is just install the app. So for those of you customers out there who are already using Infrequentier, and especially we introduced this app because a lot of the customers would have questions around, hey, how much queries, which are actually the biggest, which are actually the queries that are burning up the maximum credits on Infrequentier. How much are my users scanning on the Infrequentier, and so on, right? So for all of those answers, they can install this app and And then there are out-of-the-box dashboards that would help them get visibility into credits consumed, data scanned by users, and so on. Now, this infrequent data tier app is driven by internal system logs information that is pushed into our data volume index. And in order to ensure that we can enable this app, you'd need to go ahead and enable the data volume to start tracking, as well as then the infrequent data tier app becomes more useful, as it can then paint that picture on top. So data volume is the index which drives all of this visibility. And if some of the advanced users out there feel more comfortable going deeper into the logs and trying to understand what the system is audit logging, they can obviously go take a look into the Sumo Logic volume as well, and they'll be able to come back with the same data. So that's pretty much from a best practice perspective. And so before I go summarize, any questions on credit consumption visibility?
Nothing in the chat right now.
Super. Okay. So just kind of recapping this in terms of data tiers, best practices, and summary. Logs organization is critical to the success of data tiers. So ensure that you create partitions by grouping logs based on either microservices and the ownership areas, or based on search patterns, or based on large data sets or voluminous data sets. Again, because those are some of the common scenarios that would help you leverage the data optimally. Second, create partitions by relying on fields, FERs, and metadata tags. This provides a flexibility to reconfigure logs into tiers over the lifetime of your usage in Sumo, right? So those are like the two key best practices that I'd like to summarize on logs organization. With regards to logs querying, again, the key point here is users with a better understanding of the data organization will be able to drive the best performance, as well as optimize or minimize credit burn on the infrequent tier. And consequently, all those queries with a good scope definition will benefit from performance and minimized credit burn on infrequent tier, right? So those are two key suggestions or takeaways for us. And lastly, in terms of data tiers credit consumption, please make sure you enable the data volume tracking to ensure granular visibility. And obviously, you can then go leverage or build on top with the infrequent data tier app to drive or get some of those questions answered.
Hey, Manas, on the topic of granularity, is there a way to see both metrics and logs credit consumption in the same place? Example, by collector and source, not by either collector or source.
Yeah, we'll not be able to get down to the granularity right now in terms of by collector and source. But just to answer that top level question of, is there a place that we can look at both metrics and logs credit consumption? The account overview page is the page where you can look at metrics ingest in terms of how much credits are burnt in terms of metrics, as well as logs. And logs is broken down by the various tiers, but an aggregation of that would help you get that picture. The visibility in terms of each, how much each collector has burned is, I might have to circle back on this. I suspect that information is there in the data volume, but I can potentially take this as an offline question and circle back with an update. I don't know, Lisa, if there's a way for us to respond back, but I can circle back and share that.
Yep, I'll save the chat so I remember who asked it, and then we can send an email out.
Perfect. Okay. So at most in the view, that would be daily in the account view. Correct. Correct. So you will, at the worst case, at the lowest granularity, get it on a daily level so that you can get visibility into that. I think somebody raised their hand.
I don't see a hand raised. It
Oh,
could have
maybe.
been by mistake. That happens sometimes.
Cool. If there's, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so any last questions? If you would like him to review something again, something specific, we could go back a couple slides. Or any questions off the top of your head, feel free to raise your hand. I'll take you off mute or ask it in the chat. Oh, you're welcome, Michael. Thank you. Thanks, Manas, for a great presentation.
Thank you. I just wanted to leave you guys with also the the note that if there are any more, like, I hope you found this session useful. Two, if there is a further deep down scenario specific details around data tiers or any other aspect of the logging platform that you would like to understand, please do relay back that information, and we'll be happy to cover it the next time there is an opportunity.
Yes, thanks, Manas. And Stephanie, she asked if there's access to previous sessions. I'm going to put that link in the chat right now for you. Just give me 1 second. Let's see. So this specific session will be up probably either later today or tomorrow. And then this is where it will live in this link. So we have a YouTube page where we store all of our brown bag sessions there. And for those of you who had trouble logging in today, I just want to personally apologize. I think it was 100% my fault. Something is weird with the webinars login. For me, it should say my login. I think maybe that was what the issue was. And I feel really bad for the people who just completely couldn't come because of my mistake. So just a formal apology. I'm getting better at hosting these brown bags, and I really thank you all for your patience. But okay, so if there is no other questions, then we can wrap things up here. Manas, thank you so much for your insight and your teachings today. And we'll be sending, I'm going to personally send a recording to this particular group that registered for this course because I messed up on a bunch of things. And we have that on a recording. I should have probably stopped recording. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking now. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everyone. Bye.